Hello guys, David Vos here. What a beautiful day. I mean, it's so beautiful. There's so many clouds. It's sprinkling off and on, and cats laying all over the couch, and chickens sitting up on the chair, the back of the chair, and just dogs just sitting around looking at me, and everybody's happy, and we're all fat and fed, and just praying and contemplating the Lord's return. And I hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Well, today I don't think we're going to be able to do everything we want to talk about in this video. I guess the one we did the day before yesterday was part 1. And this is important that we do this in a series and we do several parts because there's so much to cover. I want to give you some real information today. I want you to understand beyond a doubt what is going on, because you can't figure what's going on when you've been decompartmentalized into all these different denominations and theories and ideas, doctrines, and I'm following this guy, and I'm a Lutheran, and I'm a Mormon, and I'm a witness, and I'm a Baptist. And what do you mean you're a Baptist? Well, we baptize, we dunk them, right? We're dunkers, and over here we're Pentecostals. We believe in what? You don't believe all of it? You should believe all of it. Do you follow Peter? Do you follow Paul? Or do you follow Christ? And so the problem is that we no longer know what Christ was teaching or his apostles, because some of the most important foundations for what you should believe have been removed. Now, I'm going to give you an example. We're going to start with this modern thing called preterism. It is another false religion, and it's gained a great movement. Although, thank goodness, I don't think there's time for it to go into some world religion and sweep the world, and we're all going to become preterism, right? We're going to join the church of the preterism, and and Joshua and Jacoby's going to be the great apostles of it or something. Well, in the past, we've had these ideas, but we didn't have AI. We didn't have the YouTube and the tiki-talkie. So they had to be financed by the political wheel, the engine. And therefore, they chose what you believed. They manipulated it. They didn't know to start with, so they didn't know. So it wasn't like they were picking out what was wrong and feeding it to you, necessarily. They just didn't know what to believe, and they were trying, maybe the financial people were trying to find people that already were trying to figure things out, like maybe Russell or Ellen White or somebody else, or Madame Blavatsky or anybody else, and they would take their teachings, instead of saying, oh, these were teachers, and showing you how they weren't some cult trying to lead everybody astray, but simply trying to figure things out after all that's gone on, and we're teaching the Bible. And yeah, there were some strange ideas that there's always going to be when you got some guy coming up 1,000, 2,000 years after Christ, because the church is no longer just one, but it's multiple denominations, like 4,000 denominations. Then it's become just chaos. So if the truth is lost, you wouldn't know what to finance if you did know the truth. And so anyway, it's just that there is if there is no real clear understanding of the Bible, then I don't expect anybody to understand the Bible. If the Bible itself does not just clearly lay it out and say, this is the gospel, it's very simple, receive it, be thankful for it, it makes sense, you're saved, or here's when you're going to be saved, or here's what you should do to get saved, or and when we got to get saved. Are we going to heaven? We're going to leave the earth and get wings and fly away. Are we going to wait for a resurrection? Do we think, we're all going to die and then future generations are going to be raised up? Or what, at this point, it's just like nobody knows, and you think they've convinced you. And I don't really think anybody did on purpose, but maybe they did. Maybe there are some people, the financiers and so forth. But I can't blame somebody like the Tiki-Taki prophets because they're kids, they're children. Who gave them a platform? Who told them they could go out and get millions of subscribers and tell everybody a bunch of nonsense that they don't know what they're talking about, and get all these people that are just, when did everybody become Christian? Now they're all scholars, right? But it's funny because these new Christian scholars, because they don't know the history of the church, they don't really know it. Somebody starts some idea that's not even true. Paul's not a true apostle. We've got proof, right? Oh, okay. So then this gets going everywhere, and then everybody just assumes that the earth has gone through some kind of apostasy, which is that we should never have believed in this wicked man, this apostle, in the first place. And then the whole world turns after this idea. Only reason this kind of thing could get started is because the clear teachings of the original disciples, apostles, and the early Christians for 1,000 years are not known to people today because we don't look at it. We're getting pieces, hodgepodge. You're told that it's all mixed up and you can't figure it out. And so then you got to just go back to the drawing board and look at the Bible yourself, and you're like, well, that's a big book. I don't know what that's talking about. And, and besides that, we don't speak Old English anymore. So anyway, we have all these problems. So from the point of view of an ordinary person now, just looking at things, from what we're being told right now, without knowing yourself, you're just going to say, well, they wrote the New Testament thinking that Christ was going to return, but he didn't. And so then they started having to interpret the Bible and say, well, he didn't really mean what he said, and it was just a parable. And so they started coming up with excuses. Well, it's 1,000 years, or, well, it's not, literal. It's just a kingdom in your head, or, they come up with ideas because they don't know what to do, because they don't understand the Bible. But what if I told you that the New Testament tells you in no uncertain terms, in every verse and in every chapter, the exact scenario, that if you just knew those words and what Paul was saying in Peter and James, you'd know exactly that they never once ever said that he was going to establish his eternal kingdom with a lamb lying down with a wolf soon. You go to, just think about the insanity of this. Modern religions like Jehovah's Witnesses, because they forgot what the Bible says and they're just trying to make it up now, they go and they look for a scripture like in Isaiah where it says that the lamb will lie down with the wolf, and they go, well, that's got to be the millennium. We're waiting for the millennium because Revelation talks about 1,000 years. So we're waiting for the millennium where the lamb will lie down with a wolf. Well, think about what that means. For 1,000 years, Jesus is going to reign, and then he's going to just quit. Right? And not only that, he's not just going to quit and hand it back to, his father, or hand it to the saints, or something. But no, he's going to literally allow the devil to come back up out of the bottomless pit, right? And he's going to change the hearts of the animals from where they had progressed to love and goodness, where they, the lion ate straw like the bull, and the lamb laid down with the wolf. But now he's going to change it again. How could the devil have that power? The devil's going to change it all over again, back to a carnivorous, wild, ferocious beast, where there's lawlessness and evil and wickedness. Well, doesn't the Bible say that in the latter days there will be hard times, difficult times? Men will be lovers of themselves, and there will be no agreement among anyone, and there will be tribulation and pain and sorrow and death, and everybody's enemies will be those of his own house? Yes. But it doesn't say that Jesus was going to restore paradise and his eternal kingdom, but only for a short little time, and then all of a sudden, we're all going to die again. We're all going to go back into oblivion. We're all going to have the hearts of beasts and ravenous wolves, and we're going to... What? How does this eternal nature of Eden restored get back to the brute beast coming up out of the bottomless pit? Well, if it's the eternal kingdom, it can't. It's at the end of the 1,000 years that this occurs, and Satan is let loose out of his prison. It was prophesied to be that way because we're going to go through a 1,000 years where Jesus is going to appoint his stewards, and some will be faithful and some won't. And we're going to have to try and strive to keep our white robes and make them white because we're waiting for the second coming, which is his eternal kingdom, when he's going to give us all immortality. We got to have the white robe or we ain't going to get into the wedding. And the wedding is something that happens at his second coming, which is at the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 21. As a bride adorned for her husband comes to New Jerusalem down out of heaven. Right? At the end of the 1,000 years. That's when we're going to be given this immortal kingdom where the wolf lies down with the lamb. You see. Jesus established his kingdom when he was on the earth. Why would Jesus come to the world, send forth his apostles, and tell them, all right, go out there and you tell the world that they should love one another, but they're all going to say, pooey on you. And there's going to be a great apostasy, and the world's going to fall into evil, and it's just going to last for thousands of years. And then you never know if I'm ever coming back or not. And then you're just going to have to believe that, I'm going to come, but it's going to be 2,000 years. And there's going to be thousands of denominations, mistranslations, hoaxes, lies. And you're supposed to just figure all this out. There'd be no way that would be sensical, because that's not what happened. Jesus said that I am the Christ, and many of you standing here today, people still alive right now, right here, will not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. So when did that happen? Well, if it happened 2,000 years later, that would be ridiculous. It says that 6 days later, Jesus took them up to the Mount of Transfiguration. They saw Moses and Elijah. And others will say, oh, well, that's what he means. He's just, he came with power and glory because he went up on the mountain and they got a vision. That's not what he meant either. How ridiculous. Jesus set up his kingdom. A kingdom, not an eternal kingdom, but a kingdom. And what do you have when you have kingdoms? You have priests, maybe, kings, judges, a Sanhedrin. Well, that's what Jesus did. He chose 12 and 72 also, which is the Sanhedrin. They called them the elders. They met at a place called Ariel Solomon, not Jerusalem. And I'll tell you about that here in a little bit. But James was presiding. If Jesus didn't set up his kingdom, then why is James got a gavel and making decisions and telling the disciples and the church worldwide what to do? Why were they all there having all things common? I mean, if the kingdom hadn't been established yet, this 1,000-year reign, it certainly could have been an eternal king, but they weren't immortal. They didn't have a lamb lying down with a wolf. None of that was going on, but they had something. They had a king. They had somebody in charge. They had a Sanhedrin. Think about it. Think about it. We call it the church today. But it never was supposed to be called the church. That's just a slang for it. It was his kingdom. And it was to last for 1,000 years, and then it would be an apostasy. And the Apostle Paul told us there's coming an apostasy. And then there's going to be a big test, a big tribulation, an Antichrist. And then once you've all been judged and the great battle of Armageddon is over, then I'm coming a second time to visit my church and to, have the great judgment and assign the roles that you will get and give you all white robes of immortality forever, an eternal kingdom. But this other kingdom, the 1,000 years, that's not the eternal kingdom. But it was a kingdom. They had people telling, they had apostles, they had a Sanhedrin, they made decisions. That's why you went to the elders if you had a problem. What? You mean you just decide that, oh, I'm an elder and then I'll just judge you in a back room, right, with 3 guys and nobody knows what's going on? There's no, it's like a kangaroo court. Nobody, there's no rules. They can just do whatever they want. No. You had to take them to the Sanhedrin, the elders, not the 3 people in your local household. Mom didn't, if she had a dispute with dad, she didn't go to dad and say, well, I'm going to take this to the elders. Okay, husband, what do you say? That's not how you get a decision. She needs a fair and unbiased decision. So she went to the elders. And it was not just some 3 guys in her local community that were setting up some secret society. It was the literal kingdom of Christ. And see, that's why Jesus said, wherever you are, go unto James. For heaven and earth came into being for James. Well, why is he telling everybody to go unto James? Because he was saying, look, I'm establishing my kingdom. James is going to be the one that's in charge. Wherever you are, go to James. I know Peter had the keys of the kingdom, but do you know what that means? No, people never told you this. The king has the keys, and he gives it to his second in command, who also has a key to the temple. So Peter had the keys. And it was upon this rock that he would build his church. And that church, he says, the gates of hell will not prevail. So it's the kingdom, the church, that was established. Peter was the pope, and James was the Rex Sacrorum, the Melchizedek Zadokite priest. And the elders met and they made decisions. That's the kingdom. James made a decision. And they went and they had all things common. And they were feeding the hungry and casting out the devils. That was the kingdom. Didn't Jesus say, if the devils are being cast out before you, then the kingdom of deity has come? You see? They said, well, is the kingdom coming? And he said, well, look, I'm casting out the demons. I guess I am. I'm here. I'm getting rid of the devil. So he established a kingdom, and here is the kingdom. Believe in me and have buildings where you meet and fellowship with one another. And here's the sacrament. And I want you to learn how to get your clothes white, because I'm going to go away for a long time and I'm going to come back and see if everybody's doing what I asked them to do. And then I'm going to give you a big test, final exam, and then we're going to bring the eternal kingdom. But this other first kingdom I'm starting now is just 1,000 years temporarily to see who's going to serve me and who's not going to serve me. You see, because the disciples said, hey, Lord, you want us to go out there and kill all the wicked? He goes, not yet. Because we don't know who's who yet. We have to give them a test. We got to get our white robes. We got to see who can love one another when they're tested. And who's going to break. Then we can assign who's going to sit where in the kingdom, the eternal kingdom. But for now, this temporary kingdom is just going to be established. I'm going to appoint you as faithful stewards and be faithful. There's going to be a great judgment at the last day. Oh, that's just a couple of years from now? No. A great judgment where everybody sits before the seat of Christ. And we all get the reward of what we've done in the body, whether good or evil. That hadn't happened yet. We didn't get our immortal white robes yet. We're not all immortal. But he said in the parables that was going to be future. So we'll explain all this as we go here. But what it means is that Jesus was taken to the cross. He defeated Satan. He went down into hell and got the keys of life. And he offered all who believe his kingdom. And it was called the church. And for the first 1,000 years, almost all Christians, I suppose all of them, because why would they believe anything different? There was only one church anyway in those days. There wasn't thousands of denominations. And for 1,000 years after Christ, they believed that the kingdom of Jesus would be a 1,000-year reign. They weren't completely saved and immortal. The lamb wouldn't lie down with a wolf yet. No. But that there would be stewards put in charge. Christ's stewards, priests, elders, bishops. And we would go forth and feed the hungry, clothe the naked, cast out the devils, and live the kingdom of Christ, have all things common, and live according to the principles of Jesus. And trample upon scorpions and serpents. We'd have that power. So the church age wasn't waiting for 1,000 years to come. They were living in the 1,000 years. The dominant mainstream belief was that the 1,000-year reign of Revelation chapter 20 was not a future event, but they believed it was a symbolic description of the current church age. When they were looking at the 1,000-year reign of Christ, a temporary kingdom, they weren't looking at his eternal kingdom that would establish his love and goodness and immortality. And we can prove it because Christians were getting their white robes. You had to have a white robe because when he returned, if you didn't have a white robe, you wouldn't get to go in. Right? That's what everything in the Bible's about. All the parables, everything. Well, why would you be getting a white robe? You see, the white robe is because you got to go to a wedding. Now, how in the world could you ever be absolutely in the kingdom of Christ and saved forevermore, brought under a covenant that is everlasting, into a kingdom where heaven came down and met the earth in a wedding? If there was a world that you could look around and see everything was dying, you see, you were trying to make sure that you kept your garments white. You couldn't, if you lived in a kingdom that was eternal, it had already come, and it was permanent, and the lamb was lying down with a wolf, you're not going to change that after a while till the wolf starts eating the lamb again. That was something we were waiting for. The church age was a spiritual blossoming of the rose in the wilderness. It wasn't going to be the literal. It wasn't going to be the final thing. We might be trying to get white robes and keeping them spotless, but we knew that we could still sin. We could get spots on our robe. We would have to ask for forgiveness. So, the specific theological framework that all Christians understood and believed for the first 1,000 years was called amillennialism. Augustine, who was a Christian, an early church father, Augustine of Hippo, in the 5th century, that means 400 and something, he wrote a book called The City of Deity. And it breaks down how the early church viewed. It wasn't like, oh, he was the one who invented it. He was just explaining how the whole group of people called the church what they believed. He was explaining it, what Christianity believed. And he said that they believed that there was a literal physical 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, which was the church age. Jesus died and rose again. He bound Satan, who was the strong man of Matthew 12:29, prevented him from totally deceiving the nations so that the gospel could be spread globally, so that we could go and feed the hungry and clothe the naked and teach the gospel and get people to repent and wash their robes in the blood of the Lamb, so that when Jesus does bring his eternal kingdom and the wedding occurs, we'll all be ready. He taught that the whole church taught, and he was explaining it, that the first resurrection, spoken of in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 5 and 6, was interpreted spiritually as the baptism and the spiritual rebirth. So the millennium was happening then. The 1,000 years then was a number that meant it was not forever. Now, I've heard people like Jacoby Jacob say that the word that in the Bible, when it says 1,000, it just means forever. So there's no 1,000-year reign of Christ, it's just forever. That 1,000 just means forever. But think about this. If at the end of the 1,000 years, the devil's let loose, how could it be forever? How is it that at the end of forever, we're going to open up the pit again? That doesn't make sense. And why would you believe that 1,000 means forever anyway? So what Jacoby Jacob doesn't understand is he's mixing up things. He doesn't know the Bible well enough. He hasn't read even the scholars well enough to know what they were trying to say, and he mixed a lot of things up. There is a word in the Bible, especially there in Psalms, which is what he was probably talking about when I had the debate with him, that where it says there were myriads upon myriads, or 10,000s times 10,000s, that's what that means. That was a phrase that was a phrase that meant infinite numbers. Okay, so it's not the word 1,000 that is infinite, but it's the word 10,000s times 10,000s that is a colloquial phrase that means infinite. So it was like a parable. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands just means everything you can imagine. And in that verse is talking about the stars. So we talked about that the other day, where it says that there are the myriads and the myriads of the saints that are coming on these horses. Well, it's referring to the chariot and the 4 horses, this is astrology, going across the sky and pulling behind them all the stars of heaven, which were considered infinite numbers, a great multitude which no man could number. And so it doesn't say there that Jesus is coming on 20,000 chariots, like I had originally said, because I didn't look up the word. That Christ is coming with 20,000 chariots. And I was saying that for a while myself, because I didn't really look that verse up to see what it actually said, I guess. But the reason they translated it 20,000 chariots is because it literally says 10,000s times 10,000s, which is that phrase myriads of myriads, and which is what the saints amount to, the myriads of myriads, all the angels. So they saw the phrase 10,000 times 10,000 and they wrote 20,000. They doubled it. But it's not that. It's times, and it's a phrase that means an infinite number. Septuagint calls them angels, because the angels have their white robes. That's the saints. And the myriads of myriads means all the saints, or a great multitude which no man can number. And in that verse it says, instead of the way they've translated it, it should read myriads and myriads of celestial lights, of glimmering, flashing lights. And it referred to the stars. So, the word 1,000 cannot possibly mean forever, because anything that is forever does not have an end. So, there is a literal 1,000 years. Now, yes, 10 times 10 is 100, times 10 is 1,000, which means that this period, though it is a long period, doesn't necessarily have to be exactly 1,000. It is just 10 times 10 times 10. In other words, a complete period of time until it's over. Not forever, but a long kingdom, a long period. We don't know the day and the hour. If we knew it was only going to be 1,000 and then Christ would return forever, we'd know exactly when he was going to come. So perhaps the word 1,000 means all the time necessary. A complete 10 times 10 times 10. A complete time, which does come to an end. And at that complete time, if you're not ready and you haven't got your robes spotless yet, you'll miss out. But then by that time, everyone should be able to graduate and have their garments without spot, because we're all waiting for the wedding. That's why we got to get our white robes. And the wedding is at the end of the 1,000 years, when he returns. Christ returns then, his second coming is at the end of the 1,000 years. So because they believed that they were already living in the millennium, they were not waiting for it to start. They were waiting for it to end. They expected history to conclude with this exact sequence. The current church age was the millennium, the end of the 1,000 years. Satan then be released from his pit, because remember, Jesus conquered him and gave us the Christian age. We're no longer under the law of Moses. Yeah, now we're in the apostasy, and everybody's running back to the law of Moses. You fools. But the church, the early church, for the first 1,000 years, they didn't believe that. They believed in forgiveness. And yes, after the 1,000 years, priests, you had to go to a priest and beg for forgiveness, and they could deny it, or you have to do penance, or you could buy your freedom or something. That's an apostasy. That's what happened to the church. Because Jesus said he'd have good stewards and bad stewards, and some of the bad stewards would have begun to beat their fellow servants. And they'd begin to go eat and drink with the drunkards and say his kingdom's not coming, and it's been delayed. Well, if it's going to last so long before he comes, the eternal kingdom, that people are going to start saying, oh, it's delayed, then that makes perfect sense that it's been this long. And it explains why Peter says that a day in the Lord is like 1,000 years. In other words, the day of the Lord that we're in isn't going to end real quickly. It might be 1,000 years or even longer. There's no definitive, time. But after the 1,000 years, then there's going to be a little season. And then the devil's going to be released, and everybody's going to have a test that's coming upon the inhabited world, the final judgment. So, right before the end, they believed that Satan would be loosed. And then this would be the little season, the little test. It would test humanity. So, that release of Satan would directly trigger the great apostasy. They didn't believe they were in the apostasy then, not the first 1,000 years. After the church fell into apostasy, after the 1,000 years, we went into the little season. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that there would be a falling away first before Christ returned for his eternal kingdom, where he would set up his kingdom forever, and the lamb would lie down with a wolf. So it would be a rapid global rise of the Antichrist deception, and then it'd be over. Also, early Christians believed, and they linked it very tightly to Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, where Gog of Magog comes up and has this great battle, the final battle of Armageddon. Well, that's what Ezekiel says in 38 and 39, and also what Revelation says in chapter 20, which tells us that Gog of Magog comes at the end of the 1,000 years. So this idea, they're running around telling everybody, oh man, it's been 2,000 years, it can't be literal, Christ ain't coming. They're fulfilling the very prophecy that Jesus said that some will say, he's delayed his coming. He ain't coming. Let's go eat and drink with the drunkards. They're apostates. They're following a false teaching, the doctrines of devils that was predicted by Christ. He said, when that time comes, don't believe them, false prophets. So they didn't view these as two separate wars, centuries apart. They taught that the Gog of Magog represented the total unified global convergence of all of the evil and carnal and the godless forces surrounding the camp of the saints at the end of the 1,000 years during a little season. So it's not like the Bible, made a mistake, it didn't happen, we got to reinvent it. This is exactly what it always said. So then there would be this desperate rebellion like these little children on TikTok who are trying to tell you that Christ isn't coming again, trying to tell you, Christians have always believed that Christ was coming, but it didn't happen, so, they were all wrong. That's not what they believed. They didn't believe he was coming to set up his millennial kingdom. They believed we were in his millennial kingdom. And they believed that what we're going through right now with all this confusion and these false prophets is exactly what would happen. And Paul says the apostasy must come first. So the New Jerusalem, the wedding coming down out of heaven, which is the wedding, and the white garments is the highest esoteric literal truth of this theology. So during 1,000 years, which is the church age, the church is betrothed. It's a betrothed bride. Souls are being gathered, but the marriage has not been consummated. That's what the Bible says. It says, go and try to get your white garments. Jesus is coming. Jesus gave parables. I'm going to go to a far country, and after a long period of time, I'm going to return for the visitation and make sure that everybody's wearing white robes and you've cleaned up the streets and, you've gotten everything good. You fed the hungry and you did the will of the Lord. And those who didn't do the will of the Lord will be judged. So be very careful. The early Christians maintained that only after the old earth and heaven have passed away does the New Jerusalem descend out of the heaven like a bride adorned for her husband. In Revelation 21, 1 and 2, the pure white wedding garments represents the glorified, immortal, resurrected bodies of the saints, which we don't have yet. And if people like Josh of the Sons of God Ministries and whatever his name, Derek Jester and the professor think that somehow or another Jesus has already returned, then we should all be wearing white robes, and those white robes should be spotless, and they're not going to be just some idea or teaching. Oh, I've got the right teaching, therefore I got my white garment. No, it means that we're going to have immortal bodies, and that hasn't happened. So it couldn't have already happened if it didn't happen. So, this understanding that Christians had is why modern prophetic timelines feel like it's all disorganized. Here in the 19th or 20th or 21st centuries, we've got these new religions coming up and this new system called dispensationalism, and it's all inverted into this entire ancient blueprint telling everyone that the 1,000 years was a future literal kingdom, and they cut all the prophecies into fragmented pieces, and you don't understand any of it now. So, we have to then return to the original teachings, the millennial view, which is the church age. It is the 1,000 years macro church age that ran a long spiritual course, and we are now living in the absolute tail end of history, where Satan has been loosed for a little season. We have a digital political deception on TikTok going on right now, and a modern false image system. And there is a great apostasy that is everywhere in the world right now. And some of the leaders of that apostasy do not know that they're leading the apostasy. They're just complete children. And I'm sure the Lord will have mercy on them, but I fear that they're going to lead so many people astray that they're going to have some guilt on their hands, and at the least they're going to lose their reward. And this saddens me. And Josh, if you're listening, I hope you will listen to this video carefully, and the ones that are going to be coming in this series. I believe, and I'm going to show you in this video, in this series, why probably sometime in the year 2026, spring's already passed, so probably the fall of 2026 or the spring of 27, the Great Tribulation will begin. Now, we don't know the day and the hour. We don't quite understand this exactly. We're not supposed to yet. But we're not like those who have fallen asleep. We're not going to be taken unaware. We're waiting and watching. It's not going to be like a thief in the night for us, because we know it's about here. We don't know the exact day and the hour, but we know. And we've got ourselves prepared and got our white garments. So, the ultimate second coming, the first coming was 1,000 years. Christ established his kingdom at his resurrection. Augustine says that of Hippo. So, Christ's kingdom came. That's why Jesus said, I've come, and that's why you have all these verses that talk about the kingdom that came already. The other thing that the Bible's talking about that we're preparing for, that we're waiting for, is the second coming. That's why we've got to preserve our garments white. So now the same thing that is going on here that we've just explained is also going on in a lot of different multiple teachings. You've got the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Everybody's trying to figure it out. It really isn't that hard to figure out once you understand it. Well, it is hard to figure out. I'll tell you why. It's a Rubik's Cube. It's not designed. I mean, there's just all kinds of things. It's a parable. It says, he who has wisdom, let him count the number. You've got to be very wise. It wasn't designed, all the prophecies, to be understood right away. So if you take, I always liken it to a Rubik's Cube. There are 6 sides on a Rubik's Cube. There's always 6 in every game. There's always 6 sides to a dice. 2 dice, you roll them, there's 12. Because it's astrology. So, if you could work that Rubik's Cube and get 4 sides, you would think, man, I'm really making progress. And you'd say, I got it. I got 4 sides. I'm almost there, right? I'm a lot further than I was. Almost got it. 4 sides. Only 2 sides remaining. So you think you're really close. But here's the problem. You don't realize that getting the first side is easy. Getting 2 sides is fairly easy. 3 sides, people can do that pretty easy. And a lot of people can do 4 sides. But to get all 6 sides, what happens is once you get 4, now you've got to rearrange the ones you've already got. Because they're not really in the right position yet. If they were in the right position, the ones you already apparently got, then the other 2 sides, all of the sides would be together. But they're not. You can put the verses together and make a scenario. But it's not the correct scenario. The Bible's a big book. You got to get all the sides before you say, I've got it. And so once you get 4 sides, you're really only just begun. Now you're going to have to start trying to get the other sides, and that means you're going to have to mess up the 4 sides because they're not really in the right position. They only appear to be. So, you got Daniel, you got Revelation, you got to throw all these things together and make it make sense. You've got history, you've got so many things going on. We talked yesterday, a couple days ago, we've been talking about this, that we have determined that Jesus Christ was crucified in the year 30 CE. And we can prove that that is correct. Now, when I say prove, I don't mean that we can't possibly be wrong, because like I said, if you've got a Rubik's Cube and you get all 4 sides, you think you're right, and then boom, 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 you move it around a little bit and you find out you weren't quite right because not everything fits. But I think we've got it now to where everything fits. And I don't think there's another way to do this, especially since we're coming down to what looks apparently to be the beginning of a thermonuclear war and the end of the world, as we know it. And therefore, it would make complete sense that we would figure this out by now. And with the help of AI, which means we have a lot more knowledge, which is increasing. And it says that the wise then, in that day, Daniel said, will understand. And knowledge will increase. Well, okay, so there's got to be somewhere in the world the wise understand. And it ain't these fools on TikTok trying to say, oh, but it ain't true, Jesus ain't coming. And those aren't the wise ones. The wise people are those who are going to tell you the truth. And they're going to be wise, and they're going to have to get this wisdom from something that they didn't before know. Now, of course, it's going to be the Holy Spirit. But how does the Holy Spirit work? What is the Holy Spirit? It's the Holy Mind. It's the truth. And the Lord reveals unto his prophets the truth. And they teach orally the people. And they always keep in line with prophets before them. They don't throw prophets out. They don't say, well, we can't use Paul. We'll throw that one out. Rip that out of the book. Throw that in the way. Oh, what are you going to do with the verse where Peter then says that Paul's a prophet? He's a real apostle. He's writing scripture. Well, we'll just rip Peter out too. Oh, well, what about John? Is it now you're down to nothing? Oh, well, we just believe in the red letters, Dave. Huh? The red letters of Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John were written specifically by Paul's scribe. Jesus himself didn't write the red letters. The apostles did. Don't be so foolish. Stop listening to children on TikTok and go back to the teachings of the church fathers and the Bible. Let's take a look at all this stuff. We're going to start going down some deep rabbit holes and try to explain to you why we know beyond a doubt that Jesus died in 30. Now, the dates before Jesus, we don't know for sure that they're correct. There are some dates that we can pinpoint, like 539 BC, which is the fall of Babylon. We know that that's true. We can pretty much surmise it's got to be true. Because everybody since Nabonidus and all these, Cyrus and Artaxerxes and all these people in those days, they had scribes and they wrote down everything that they did and everything they said. And we've got a continuous line down to 539 or the fall of Babylon. And then that same lineal descent was handed over to Persia. Now, there is some problems with it. We don't know everything and every date and every possibility. Because thousands of years ago cannot be known in every detail. But we do know that Jerusalem was destroyed in about the year 587. And Jerusalem was taken captive into Babylon. And then Nebuchadnezzar dies in 562. After 587, he destroys Jerusalem. 562, Nebuchadnezzar dies. Then there's like Nabonidus, and then there's a guy named Belshazzar. And Belshazzar is sitting in this banquet hall, just like a glutton, drinking and eating and having, a big party. And all of a sudden, a hand comes out of the sky, or the air, and writes on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel Upharsin, which means you've been weighed in the balances and you've been found wanting. And you're going to go. It's over. And in that very hour, Cyrus the Great took Babylon. They drained the Euphrates, they went down through the tunnels and came into the city and took Babylon. And that began something that most people don't understand. They know some of it. You've got all these people, witnesses, Adventists, trying to figure all this out, Mormons, Catholics, everybody. Now we've come 2,000 years and we've forgotten everything we used to know. And what people don't understand is that Cyrus the Great was an Israelite, because the Israelites had been taken captive into Assyria in 720. That was 100 years before all of this, or more. And so Israel was favored, and the line of Zerah became the ruling line. And all of these names like Cyrus, Artaxerxes, Ahasuerus, all of these different names are just the same word, written in different languages. So Cyrus, you could say Sirius or Cyrus or Osiris. It came down today, we have the same word, like the Romans would say Caesar. It's the same word. Or the Tsars of Russia, or the Khazars, or Nebuchadnezzar, or the Eleazar of the Hebrew, high priest, El meaning the definite article, deity, Tsar. Or Lazarus, which is the Latin way of saying it. Lazarus in our Bibles is not some guy. He's a high priest. And he acted out in the story, the same story of Osiris, who died and was raised up by his son. So there is a lot of confusion. I'm not going to kid you. They've lost a lot of information. And therefore, we can't be certain about the dates back to Abraham and all of this. We can't go by chronology. We can't tell you, oh yeah, there's been this many thousands of years since Adam and we know everything. But we don't need to. Because what we need to know is that Jesus said he would come again at the end of the age. And we know how long these ages are. We know what the apostles say about this. And we know that if we know the day that Jesus was crucified, then we have something. Now, we talked about that the other day, and I'm not going to go back into that. We talked about how Herod could be 1 BC or 4 BC. We talked about how when John the Baptist came baptizing, it was the 15th year of Tiberius. We know that. The Bible tells us that unequivocally. The question is, do we go by Tiberius's co-regent reign from 27? Or do we go from when he reigned solely after Augustus Caesar passed away? Because Augustus Caesar died after 42 years of reigning or something. So, they reigned conjointly for 2 years. So, the date when Tiberius Caesar began to be emperor was 27. But it could be 28 or 29. So how do we know? Well, the reason we know is because Jesus was 30 years old when he was baptized. And he had a 3.5-year ministry. This is in the Bible. We can go into the New Testament and find out how many Passovers passed and how many years he... Going back to Daniel, we know that Messiah will, at the half of the week, be cut off. So the half a week is 3.5 years. So we know all of this. From various ways, we could prove that when Jesus was baptized, there would be 3.5 more years, and then he was crucified. So when was he crucified? Well, if it was 27 that he was baptized, it would have been in the year 30 that he was crucified. And we know that that's the case, as we said the other day, because I'm just going to give this part briefly because we got to get into some other stuff. There were 5 signs that are written in the Talmud, both the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud. And they all say that from the year 30, there were signs for 40 straight years until Jerusalem was destroyed in 70. So they also wrote in the Talmud about a man named Yesu that died on the eve of Passover. And you say, well, there you go, right? When did it happen? Well, because the Jews didn't want anyone to accept Jesus, they misplaced that verse. First, they crossed it out. We have it, the original. We can see it's written there. But they deleted it. And then when they rewrote it and they put it back in, they misplaced it on purpose. But they did it in such a way that anybody who knows how they work knows that it was supposed to be in this era, in the era of the first century. But they lifted it out of that. We can prove that. They lifted it out and misplaced it purposefully in another era about 100 BC, or 75 BC is what it was. In the reign of Janneus, the Hasmonean leader that had a war with the Jews. He was a Zadokite priest. So because of this evil dispute between these two priesthoods, the true Zadokite priest line went to Egypt, and they built the Leontopolis, New Jerusalem. And this is where the apostles were and where John the Baptist was baptizing, and this has been hidden from a lot of people. But the Jews didn't have the Zadokite priesthood. The Essenes talk about they wouldn't even listen to any priesthood that wasn't Zadokite. We know from Josephus that the Zadokite priesthood was at Leontopolis, on the spot where Heliopolis was. And they built what they called the tower. They rebuilt the same tower that Joseph's wife Asenath, the daughter of Shechem and Dinah, Jacob's daughter, Joseph married Asenath and was at Heliopolis at the tower. And from that point forward, that's the tower that later on we find Miriam's there. It's called Ephratah or Bethlehem. And today we call it Dendera. But if I were to go into every little detail on this, and we've done it in other videos, it would take forever. So let's just pass over that. That's the basic idea of what's going on here. This tower is not the same shape as the temple at Jerusalem. The temple at Jerusalem was square and rectangular and, it didn't have a pinnacle. It wasn't a tower or a pyramid. And James was thrown off the pinnacle of the temple, so therefore it couldn't have been Jerusalem. And James was presiding over a Sanhedrin. Well, they couldn't have had a Ebionite, the poor, which is another word for the Essenes or the Nazarites. They're the same group. Sometimes they were called the healers, the Therapeutai. They were in Egypt. They were called the Ebionites. They were not at Jerusalem. They were at Ariosolomon and at Leontopolis. And so the Sanhedrin is the same Sanhedrin. They were officiating later on at Alexandria because they already burned down Heliopolis. So they were officiating the Heliopolis priesthood at Alexandria in Egypt. And they had a 72 Sanhedrin. And we know that that's the same Sanhedrin that translated the Bible, the Septuagint, and that's the Holy Textus Receptus. And all of this is being hidden from you. And they had a religion there because of these Zadokite priests, the Serapis Christ. So what is Serapis Christ? Well, we know what Christ is. It's the lineal anointed priesthood. But what is Serapis? It's Osiris Apis. Osiris, the bull. And that was the true deity. It was called Osiris. And that was first century. That was the first century BC. So for 150 years, mostly the last 100 years of the last century before the first century, Christianity was going along. They made buns with crosses on them. They had the sacrament, which is the wedding, the Arios Gamos. They revered the woman. They had a priesthood, the Rex Sacrorum, the Melchizedek priesthood, which was a man and a woman. And it was carried on at Heliopolis and Karnak. They had the virgin birth. They had all the teachings that Christianity has. So, this has all been also taken away from you, so that you no longer know about the true Ariosolomon, or they translated Jerusalem, just like they translate the other word, which should be translated Jerusalem. There were two locations. It's also called not just Ariosolomon or the house of Solomon, which is Amun-Ra or Sol Aman at Karnak, but it's also written as Beth Ani or the house of On in the Bible. And it's also written as the Tower and Magdala, Mary Magdala. Mary meant the priest, the first of which was Miriam, Moses' sister, or even before that, Semiramis. So this was the high priestess. Mary, the mother of Jesus, the virgin, was a priest. The scriptures themselves tell us that she was a virgin priestess in the temple. They didn't have virgin priestesses up at Jerusalem, where Herod's temple was. So anyway, this is a lot of the stuff that we're missing, but we've gone over through all of this, and I've got some other things I want to tell you about. Now, that temple at Heliopolis was destroyed just like the Jerusalem temple, but it was destroyed in 73 AD. So, we know then that according to the Talmud and according to the Bible itself that we have, Jesus said, this generation will not pass. And when he died, he said that just days before he died, when they asked him, what will be the sign of thy coming? He said, this generation will not pass. And we know that that's a phrase, just like that other phrase we were talking about with myriads and myriads. This is a phrase, generation will not pass, taken from the Israelites who were in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, it doesn't mean that a generation is 40 years. And Jehovah's Witnesses knew this from the very beginning, back when they were trying to teach about this 1914 thing. They knew that it meant that a person had to be an adult, and that they were the generation, adults, up 20 years. And that they would not pass away, meaning they'd go another 40. That was the generation. Adults would go 40 years. They'd be about 60. And then they'd start passing away. But it wouldn't go past 60, because that was a generation. So you had to be about 20 or 30 years old, and that generation wouldn't pass. And so they consider a generation 40 years. So if Jesus died at 30, then he was saying that Jerusalem would be destroyed in 40 years, and that would place it at 70. So we know that Jesus died in 30 for that reason as well. Now keep in mind that we can verify all of the dates from Augustus Caesar, from Julius Caesar on down all the way to history, because of astrology, because of astronomy, because the historians always wrote what they said from different angles so that we would have absolute proof of when this happened. There are no missing years. And we can triangulate the history also with the stars, because they will mention a meteor. Remember, when Julius Caesar died, they saw a star that appeared, a new star. And they said, well, that star was when Julius Caesar died. That new star was Julius Caesar. He was deified. They explained what they saw and wrote it down so that we know exactly when Julius Caesar died. We cannot be mistaken, because that same event was chronicled by the Chinese and by all the other known nations on earth. They all saw it. All the astrologers of Babylon, Assyria, China, India, Rome, Egypt, everywhere chronicled, and everybody knows. And we've got computers today that can go back through the way that the stars rotate like a clock. It cannot be an error. We can go back and find the exact date, especially since if there's supposed to be a star that's seen, and we can rotate back and get the exact day down to the second. But not only that, we can triangulate that with all the history we have that I said we know is accurate. So even though there are sometimes some small questions, like which full moon was it talking about, we can usually triangulate that with, well, that one was on a Passover, so it'd have to be this. Or this was that, so we can figure all of that out. But the major kings, like Caesars and emperors and popes and all of that, we know the dates. It's all written down. The only reason we didn't know when Jesus was born exactly is because Jesus was obscured on purpose. Because the Jews, the Talmudic Jews, didn't want people to believe in Jesus. And they've gotten the kingdoms of the world to go into a slowly, gradually into some kind of apostasy, and to forget or try to obscure the date that he was born. And I think the Lord allowed that because he didn't want us to know exactly when Jesus was born, so then we could figure out when he was coming and all of this. So that's all been obscured by fools trying to speculate on stupid things. But we all know, all the historians know when Julius Caesar died and the date. And because there were these religions that came up in the last 150 years, like Jehovah's Witnesses and Adventists, and they were fools, kind of like these children on TikTok. They're not scholars. They didn't want to follow in the footsteps of the prophets before them. They rejected everything and tried to start all over again and start their own little cult. And they come up with strange ideas. And then they popularized strange ideas. And then they got people confused. But people weren't confused until these modern individuals like William Miller and Adventists and so forth. Before that, everybody knew these days. And then we've got prophecy, which can be misunderstood. And to juggle that with history and things like that is how it becomes a little difficult. So I think the reason why we don't understand Daniel's 70th week and the 490 years and the 7 times and Jeremiah's 70 year that lays desolate and all of this is because it wasn't time to understand it. But the odd thing is that now that we do understand it, it really is very simple. So I'm going to go through step by step Daniel's prophecy of 490 years. We're almost an hour here today, so I won't be able to go into it here. And so this is kind of how it's going to be. We're going to go slow. We're going to handle one aspect at a time until we get that down. Today, I just wanted you to understand that we're not trying to figure something out that couldn't possibly be true because it's been 2,000 years and Jesus didn't come and now we're just grasping at straws. And I want you to understand that we can know when Jesus died. And therefore, if we have Daniel's prophecy and we know all this, we can figure out exactly what's going on here. We're looking for 1,260 days. And all over the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, it tells you, wait and watch. Wait and watch. And when you catch sight of, and that's when you know, right? Don't be in the dark. It's coming as a thief in the night, but you're not going to be caught as a thief. You're going to know. Why? Because he who has wisdom will count the number. Like Jesus said, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him who readeth with discernment. In other words, when you read that, you're going to have to discern and figure it out and calculate it. And it's going to take the Holy Spirit. That's just been the last 150 years, Adventists and people making up these new false doctrines. Witnesses and Adventists think that they're the truth and that the false doctrine is the Catholics. And they're going to tell you the real truth. Well, they become apostate. They're the apostasy. They're the ones beating their fellow servants. But don't worry, there's enough guilt to go around because the Catholics are now beating their fellow servants too. Because after the 1,000 years ended, the Catholics went around trying to murder and, do these inquisitions and murder people. So they're all doing it. They're beating their fellow servants. They've lost the truth. They're no longer the servants of the Lord, faithful servants. But they're unfaithful stewards. And in fact, now we're going to show you how they've joined forces with the government and they've become apostate. And so you can go along with all the rest of the world in this confusion, or you can get out of Babylon and just pray and have faith in the Lord and ask for his guidance. And we're going to do that in this series, and we're going to figure this out. So what we're going to find is that we're waiting for the 1,260 days. Daniel was talking to the angel who raised his left and his right hand and swore by the one who made heaven and earth that it shall be for a time, times, and a half a time. And at the end of 1,260 days, all these things shall come to their finish. Go thy way, O Daniel. You'll receive your lot at the end of days. So then we go to Jesus' day, and he's like, yep, whatever Daniel said, let the reader use discernment. You got to figure this out. And John, in the book of Revelation, says, here are the ones who have wisdom, who count the number of the beast. So we've got to be one or group in that group that has the wisdom, that we can calculate all of this. And it's not hard. We just got to stop listening to the false teachers and the naysayers and the ones who say, it's not going to happen. He delayed his coming, and they start beating their fellow servants. So we know that Jesus is the Messiah and that Jesus died at the half of the week. And therefore, whatever the 490 years of Daniel is, they've already run except for 1,260 days. That's all we're waiting for. Christ died on the cross, and sacrifices and gift offering have ceased. And now we're waiting for the abomination spoken of by Daniel. And when we catch sight of it, and it's going to be a little horn who will be the king over 10 other kings that will burn the world with fire. That's what's going on right now. And they will create an image unto the beast and cause everybody to bow down to it. And we're going to explain what that is. And we're going to be able to explain the datings of these things and what's about to happen. The Great Tribulation is about to happen, and you need to understand all of this. So we're going to talk about every little detail. We're going to take a series of videos here. For instance, we just talked about how Julius Caesar, they saw a new star. It just appeared, and they said, oh, well, that's because Julius Caesar's died and he's been deified. But the Bible says that there's something about a star in relation to Jesus, and the wise men followed the star unto Bethlehem to a specific house, and it stood over the house. You see, they followed it. And this is a phrase. And when you find phrases that match other phrases, you can go back and see what it's talking about. So there's another time where there was something that followed Israel. It was a cloud by day and a fire by night that followed Israel. It followed them. It would stop and move forward and go on and hover over them. And there was a cloud that overshadowed the Transfiguration Mount. We find this throughout the Bible. And so this star, in this case, isn't a astrological sign or a new star or a meteor or anything like that. This was a literal light that they described as a star that hovered above them, and they followed it until it stood over a child in a specific house. So we'll talk about that tomorrow and exactly what that means, because this is completely different than some kind of astrology that you might have thought it might have been. So anyway, I'm going to probably just leave it there. And tomorrow we're going to go into some deep, intricate details to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt the chronology, the 7 times of Daniel, the tree that was banded 7 times, the image that was built that Daniel saw, the head of gold, how that relates to the image in Revelation chapter 13, and the beast, the 7 heads, the 10 horns, and all these things, and the 490 years of Daniel, the 70 weeks of years. And as well, at some point, we're going to do several videos here, but at some point we're going to talk about the 70 years of desolation in Jeremiah chapter 4 that Daniel spoke of, having read Jeremiah. And there's something there that it'll blow your mind because everybody's missed it. But anyway, we're going to leave it there for now. And we're going to hope you have a wonderful evening. You know the Lord loves you all. His grace and His peace will always be with you. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.